Welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
All right, guys, I'm really excited to have Rabbi Daniel Lapin here on the podcast with me today. Rabbi, thanks for joining me today.
It's wonderful to have the chance to be together. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just describing to Rabbi Lapin, we're going to just talk through an essay that I have written talking about how we should think about our life as fathers, in particular, as building households, building families, building businesses. And there's a lot of connection between those things. I've learned a lot of those things from various Jewish writers in particular. Rabbi Lapin has been a big inspiration for me. And so when we got connected, I asked for him to come on here and interact with me on this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and read this essay. And then Rabbi, just get your thoughts. And I have, some of the questions I'd love to dive in as we kind of get into the meat of this conversation. So this essay is called "Every Father is a Startup Founder." So Jesus reveals to us in the parable of the talents in Matthew 25 that God is like an investor who gives out seed capital expecting a return. But today we don't seem to realize that a wealthy, loving investor has given us so many resources, and we choose to take his resources. So he is looking for his return. Consider how fatherhood looks from God's perspective as an angel investor. God is interested in the long term. He gives you lots of talents and skills, Deuteronomy 8. He then gives you a wife, Proverbs 19. He starts to give you a whole team of human beings for your startup, Psalm 127. Everything from God's perspective is going great. You were alone, but now you have this growing household maturing all around you, ready to launch into numerous productive endeavors. Then something strange happens. You, the founder of this new startup, choose to neglect the resources your investor poured into you as a means of producing income. Instead, you choose to work entirely on your own. You may even encourage your wife and kids to go out and work on their own as well. Your household is economically unproductive. Just at the point when the household could be most fruitful, just when your investor could start to see a return on his investment, the household scatters, only to start the investing, building, and scattering cycle all over again, generation after generation. Why does this happen? Because most fathers don't know that when they are building a family, they are founding a startup. Men become fathers, fathers build families, families build households, and households are designed to be startups. And this is not just an analogy, it's literally true. Some households were designed to be the platform from which every father launches an actual business. The command to be fruitful wasn't given to businesses, it was given to families in Genesis 1. This does not mean a father can't work outside the home or serve a church or a nonprofit as well. Many fathers in Israel, like the Levites, did both, Numbers 35. But every father in Israel launched an economic enterprise out of his household, not just in Israel. This was true everywhere in the world throughout history until modern times. We thought we had a better idea. We thought by dividing the family into its individual units and going off to work as individuals, we could increase productivity. We could build much larger enterprises that were not encumbered by the constraints of the household. And we were right. It turns out if you take all economic activity out of the household and place it in shared spaces, you can increase productivity. But we forgot something. Remember God, our angel investor? It's his resources we are splitting up and sending out. And maybe he had a reason for investing in the family as a startup. What could that reason be? When investors get together to look over deals, they look for startups that have a near infinite growth potential. They sometimes call these hyper-growth businesses, but sometimes they will meet a startup founder who seems to want to start a company not primarily for endless growth, but to fund a certain kind of lifestyle for his or her family, and maybe for his or her employees and partners as well. This is a major turnoff to most investors. They will label this startup business a lifestyle business and warn each other to steer clear. It's unlikely that they will get the 10x return that they're looking for from the startup that's a lifestyle business. Who would ever want to invest in a lifestyle business? I know someone who already has. Remember God, our angel investor? He has invested enormous resources in your startup and wants you to launch a lifestyle business. He wants a 10x return, but across multiple generations. He's eternal. He can wait, but he doesn't want us to waste time. This is God's advice for those like us living in exile. Quote, build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat food from their produce. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that they may have grandchildren. Multiply. Do not dwindle away. That's from the prophet Jeremiah. He wants your home to be fruitful, and he wants it to multiply. This can include work for business and nonprofits outside of the home, but we must build enterprises in and through our homes, with our wives, with our kids, as a team. This creates the kind of lifestyle our investor is looking for, not merely a financial return, because family startups create something that's far more valuable. Quote, didn't the Lord make you one with your wife in body and spirit? You are his. And what does he want? Godly children from your union. This is from Malachi 2. When we work through our home, with our wife, with our kids, God gets a multifaceted return on his investment. So how do we make this practical? Is it possible to launch household enterprises today? Yes, it's more possible today than in the past 100 years. I'm calling on every father to launch a household enterprise with your wife, with your kids. Start small and simple. Grow a garden and sell its produce. Rehab a house, landscape, roast coffee beans, teach music, make and sell products, sew, groom dogs, write, speak, raise kids. Type into YouTube even what you want to do, what you like to do, and the phrase for profit. You can start to see lots of different ideas. Make your household economically productive. Fund a household-centered lifestyle. Raise godly children by being present because you work together. Remember, this doesn't mean this is your only source of income. Start small and slow. Make it fruitful, then let it multiply. Give your investor the return he deserves by letting your children and your children's children enjoy the presence and leadership of their father. Return home. Okay, that's a lot. Thank you for listening to that, Rabbi Lapin. So, yeah, anything that stirs up for you, anything you would correct. I love writing these essays to kind of get the conversation going, get feedback. So I'm curious what that stirs up for you.
Oh my gosh, that's so many interlinked ideas. Frankly, that's a book.
Yeah.
It's too much for one essay, if you don't mind me saying. It deserves, I mean, a minimum of 12,000 words, but it could easily be, a short 40,000 word book easily, I think.
Yeah. There are so many different ideas. Yeah. I'm trying to like tease out, and at this point, kind of trying to disentangle. I know there's sort of like, a theological case that I'm trying to work through. Like, is this what God's design? And I'm curious what you think of that. Like just maybe that's the highest level, the foundation of what I'm trying to grapple with.
Yeah.
Did God make the family to be economically productive?
It's even more than that, Jeremy. It flows very specifically from Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, where God says it's not good for man to be alone. Now, you'd have thought that the very next sentence would be that God gave Adam an anesthetic, put him to sleep, and started forming Eve. That's what you would have thought. But it actually isn't like that. And as a matter of fact, verse 19 is something else altogether. Verse 19 is, oh, well, now God goes ahead and makes all the animals and the birds, and then he sets up a zoological review, bringing all these creatures to Adam, and he's introducing them to Adam, and Adam then is naming them. And guess what? I mean, the name that Adam gave them, well, that's going to be the name for always. I thought we were talking about not good for man to be alone. What's that doing there? And then only after the zoological review and the major symposium has been concluded, only then does God set about introducing us to Eve. And then things continue, and that whole story in the Garden of Eden ends with Adam and Eve being banished from the Garden of Eden. Punishments are applied, and then an interesting sentence: by the sweat of your brow you will eat bread.
Yes.
Now, one has to look at this quite carefully to see that one's ordinary instinct is in error. Most of us have always assumed that by the sweat of your brow you will eat bread. That's kind of part of the curse and the punishment for Adam and Eve. Oh, boy, you're now going to have to work like crazy. Well, it doesn't make sense, because we're told much earlier in the chapter that God put Adam in the Garden of Eden to work it. Very clearly it says.
Yes.
So what's the difference?
Yes. Yeah, I'm very curious.
He had
What is
he
the
had to
difference?
work before. So obviously there are pages. I should show you what ancient Jewish wisdom looks like on this.
Yes, I would love to hear that.
This isn't a virtual background behind me, Jim.
You
Or if
actually
it
have
is,
books.
it's very neat, because it lets me do this trick of pulling out books.
Oh, that's great.
But I thought, let me show you what these verses look like. So, are you familiar with the Ainsworth Bible that Reverend Henry Ainsworth produced in England in the early 1600s, and that the Pilgrims brought over with them?
I don't think I have. No.
It's a wonderful Bible. And let me see if I can pull that one down. I just want to show you, and I'm going to try and make sure that I can hold it up, that it makes sense. Okay, so what I wanted to show is that what Ainsworth does with his Bible is he puts the text.
Okay.
And there is the text of a few verses in Leviticus. And then underneath are all his notes.
Okay. So lots of commentary interspersed with
just
the
a few verses, a lot of commentary.
Okay.
And that's what Reverend Ainsworth's Bible looks like. Now, the reason I mention this is, first of all, gosh, about a quarter to a third of all the explanations that he brings down underneath are from ancient Hebrew sources. And he quotes some of these sources by name. Now, let's look at a Hebrew version. And here we've got a typical Hebrew version. And again, I want you to notice there, oops, here we go. Here are a few words in Hebrew in the heavy, big, bold text.
Okay.
Everything else you're looking at is commentary. Now we'll turn over to the next page. There is so much on those three words that the next page has only another few words, and again a whole lot of commentary. Let's turn over one more page. Look at this page.
They're just going to continue with the commentary.
Yes, that's right. We can't carry on with the text yet because we haven't finished dealing with those 7 words. And we turn the next page, and so it continues. And the next page. And now finally, we turn the next page. And now on this lot, there's a lot less, because look how many words we cover over here. And but a lot of the time, there's a huge amount. So not surprisingly, this volume is only one of the 5 books. Okay, so with that as background, we can take a look and see what's going on. And that when God says, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread, this already is past the punishment. This is actually God being nice to Adam, because Adam has said to God, I realize, and this is all from this material that I was talking about, and a lot of it Henry Ainsworth brings as well. Adam says to God, look, I know you went to an awful lot of trouble to create human beings as different and distinct from animals. I realize that. And I realize that we are the only creatures touched by your finger, and that we're supposed to be unique. And I blew the very first instruction you gave me. The first instruction you gave me was not to eat things I felt like eating.
Mm.
It's like the very first rule.
Yes.
Eat of these trees, not of that one. It shouldn't be the hardest thing to do.
Yes.
But yet I blew that.
Mm.
And the result is that I'm worried you will now, from here onwards through history, you will treat me just like an animal, because just as animals eat what they see, I did the same thing. And so I pray to you, please give me another chance. And so God's response is, well, you're still going to have death, because that I've ruled. I mean, you've done that.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what I'll do. I will give you another chance. When it comes to eating, I'm going to give you a special kind of food that nobody else has, no other creature has. That's called bread. And this is, every time you eat this, it's going to remind you of me. Because this is food that no animal makes. Human beings make it. And what's more, it's going to require many human beings. And it's going to require cooperation and friendship and connection between those human beings. Somebody's going to plant the wheat. Somebody's going to harvest the wheat. Somebody's going to beat it into flour. Somebody's going to bake the flour into bread. Somebody else is going to move the bread from the baker to the store. And then you will come and get the bread. And so a lot of human beings have been involved in making all of this happen. So you can see that no animal does that. Animals eat what's there. Human beings prepare for bread long before they actually want it. They have to plant the wheat and go through the whole process. And that will remind you, this is one of the reasons that many religions treat bread as sacramental. I'm one of 3 boys. My mom didn't really care when we punched each other out. She didn't even care if we hurled blocks of wood or stones at each other. She figured we're going to learn that way how to function. But if she ever caught us throwing a bread roll, she'd come along and punch our ears. Because you can't throw bread. Bread is holy.
And so you're saying, so if I could draw connections, so Adam is being told he can't do this alone. You're not, and then he looks at all the animals. There's a distinction there. He needs something else, someone else, another kind of helper. This helper, after the fall, helps him bring into the world this bread.
Right. And now we come to the interesting part, which is that in almost every culture, now I'm going to use a slang term with you, Jeremy. And the term is less used now than it was in the middle of the 20th century, but you may well be familiar with it. And that is, can you lend me some dough?
Yes.
Do you remember they also would say, do you have any bread on you?
Right. Yes.
And if you actually look up slang dictionaries and figures of speech, you will find that bread and dough are metaphors for money in many languages. And this is where it comes from. Because the critical sentence is verse 18, where God said, above all, the most important thing is, I don't want you all to be isolated. I don't want you to all be alone.
Yes.
You know, it's okay if a lion spends 3 weeks walking across the savannah by himself. If a young beaver male leaves his beaver lodge and then spends the next year roaming the Canadian countryside looking to find a female beaver to start his own lodge, that's fine. But I don't want human beings to ever be alone. Yes. And I am creating, because I'm a good and loving God, I'm creating 2 incentives. I'm giving you 2 reasons, 2 benefits why you should connect with other people. One is sex, and the other is money. I'm giving you a woman, and I'm giving you bread. Now, sex is just another name for family. Because the whole reason that I go to Thanksgiving and my uncles are there and my cousins are there, it's only for one reason, and that's because grandpa and grandma's eyes met across a room one day many years ago, and they subsequently found ecstasy in one another's arms. And they've been together ever since. And the result is They had children, including my father and his brothers and sisters. So I have uncles and aunts, and they had children. But all of this is the magic of the male-female connection that God put there to make sure we wouldn't be alone. So sex or family is one. The second one is money, bread. Because the whole process of getting bread introduces us to the whole idea of money. Because how do I persuade the farmer to grow wheat? And how do I persuade the miller to grind the wheat? And how do I persuade the baker to bake the flour? And the answer is, in all these cases, I come up with money. And that is why every country that grew out of the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is namely the people of Israel, and then after that Rome, and subsequently what we call Western civilization, are all the countries where money found early acceptance. In the rest of the world, they used bartering. And so money was part of the gift that the good Lord gave us. Now, the conception of a family is, of course, one of the great pleasures God gave to human beings. What about making money? Well, for those who are listening to us, Jeremy, and who haven't yet made money, you can't imagine how wonderfully fun it is. Now, English is one of the very few languages, along with Hebrew, that makes a distinction between winning money and earning money. And it's a hugely important distinction.
Like linguistically, it makes that distinction?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it makes a distinction because we speak English and we can make a distinction between winning and earning. I now am at leisure to tell you that people who win the lottery usually end up unhappy.
Yeah.
Never works well. People who just inherit a bunch of money from their parents without their parents having worked at imparting a spiritual legacy in building the family, which is back to your essay, end up unhappy. But people who earn money are happy. It's wonderful to make money or to earn money. And so here's the key thing. In building a family and in earning money, you cannot do it alone.
Yeah.
In the case of building a family, you need another person, and it's another person who's different from you. It doesn't work if it's the same kind of person as you.
Yes.
And in making money, you absolutely have to find another human being to serve. And again, it's a different sort of person. It's a person who needs the services that you can provide.
Yes.
And so even the songwriter who sits locked up in his hotel room trying to come up with a tune, when he's got it done and he knocks it out on his computer in GarageBand and he ends up with an MP3 file, he doesn't just sit there. He emails it off to his agent. And his agent then contacts the buyers of songs, and somebody buys it. And then the agent receives the payment and transfers it with Venmo to the songwriter. So it may look like he's all alone in his hotel room writing songs, but the money flows into his account only because he's connected with other people.
Yes.
And so God's primary purpose here is not good for man to be alone.
So when you think about the role of the family, one of the things that's I know for me has been really confusing to try to distinguish is in a post-industrial society where it seems like companies really, they want just one member of the family, right? So they kind of break down the family and say, okay, we want this one. And so there's this sort of scattering experience that's happening. That's really unique to the way that society has evolved in terms of how extensive that is. And is there reason to resist that? What do you think about how do we, when we're talking about the purpose of this is so that we don't be alone, God's placed us in families, but our economic interests seem like it's beginning to pull that core group apart. How do we think about that? How do we handle that?
Okay, so first of all, it's important to remember that the more that things change, the more we must depend upon those things that never change. That's a Rabbi Daniel Lapin slogan number 11. The more that things change, the more we must depend on things that never change. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that certain things may superficially change, and the camouflage makes us think they're different, but they're not. For instance, I travel usually about between 5 and 10 days a month for business. I give speeches around the country, sometimes outside the country. My great-grandfather also, when I checked, he was a businessman, but he used to travel between 5 and 10 days a month. The difference is I get on a plane and he used to get on a horse wagon. And the difference is I sleep in a 5-star hotel, maybe 4. He used to sleep in a barn wherever he could find a pile of straw to rent from a farmer. Those are differences, but they're not profound, because we both traveled away from the comforts of home for about the same amount of time every month. I covered a big distance and met a lot of people. He covered a smaller distance. But at the end of the day, my travel helps me feed my family. His travel helped him feed his family. I travel more comfortably, but he never felt that because he never knew of the existence of airplanes or hotels.
Right. Yes.
And so there's no change, really. Everything is the same. Here's another important one. My great-grandfather knew that he can't survive. He and his wife must have more than 2 children, because when they get old, they won't be able to work and they're going to need to depend on their children. Their children were their social security system.
Right.
And so they knew they had to have more children than they were 2 people, a husband and wife. They had to have at least 3, because 2 is at the bare minimum. I mean, 1 is out of the question, because how can one person support his own family plus his 2 parents? 2 people, at least a bit of a chance. 3, you're beginning to do okay. The more children you have, okay, now I know what a lot of people are saying as they hear that. Well, that's in those days. Today, this is all nonsense. The more that things change, the more you must depend on those things that never change. Nothing has changed. You know why? Well, I don't need my children for my social security. I have a 401k, and I've got investments, and I've got portfolios. I understand. But you know that small apartment building you bought for your retirement, in order for that to have tenants who are going to pay rent, there have to be people out there.
Right. Now,
there are apartments, not a lot of people sleeping on the street. I mean, let's not go into the homeless question. But the fact is, if you want people to get into your apartment, you need more people. You know your 401k and you know your investment portfolio. Most of that is held in equities on the American stock markets. Those are, for the most part, businesses that need to make money in order to pay a dividend in order for you to be able to retire. And for them to have customers and workers, they need a growing population. Guess what? Nothing has changed. In great-granddad's day, you needed a pyramid-shaped population structure. Every generation needed more people underneath it and more people underneath it. You have to have an expanding population if you want to be able to live comfortably.
Right. So the scale has changed, but
the scale has changed, but nothing else has. And so one of the things that's not changed is work, right? We all work, 8 hours a day, maybe 10 hours a day. We all work, and we work 6 days a week. We should, because the Bible says explicitly, 6 days you shall work. We're not all together. We're not working on the family farm, because even when we did work on the family farm, I've got 4 sons, and Abraham was interested in the cows, and Birdie was much more interested in the chickens and the wheat, and Charlie is more interested in, Abraham and Birdie and Charlie and David never saw each other during the day anyway, till everyone came home for dinner. Around the dinner table, we were together. Nothing has changed. We still should be doing that. Family dinners should be sacrosanct. No telephones, no televisions. Family dinner time, hugely important. The dining room table is a place that proper families retain a literally indelible memory of. You ask little kids and big kids who grew up in a good functioning family, they'll talk about meal times around the table were the greatest times. Very, very important. So a lot of family building time happens while we eat.
Family Teams is going to Israel. Join us on an 8-day tour of the Holy Land where Jeremy and April Pryor, along with an Israeli tour guide, will take you on the ultimate tour. Not only will you see all the major sites Israel has to offer, but you'll hear the history of the land from a native Israeli and from a Christian perspective. You'll experience the Shabbat of a lifetime, talk about God's multi-generational plan for Israel, and also what the land, people, and history teach us about God's vision for family. Learn more at familyteams.com.
So it seems like because of that scale change, because we live in a culture where our interdependence is sort of hidden from us, like you just articulated. It used to be really clear. I need my family. I need to have children in order for me to be cared for. I need to, and even as you described your grandfather, when he was out there traveling, he was doing it because he wanted to provide for his family. Today, people are beginning to think that work is really an expression of their individual identity. So, and this is really tearing families apart. When I go off to work, it isn't as an expression of my, being a father or mother or son or daughter in this family. It's really an expression of my desire to form an individual identity that's separate from the family. Yes. And the scale of what we're doing seems to really create that. And only those who have very grounded traditions help remind them, like that table you're describing. It seems like without that, there isn't this clear connection that they feel to the family, the creating that family work connection. It's being somehow separated, and that's kind of what I'm trying to understand. How do we recover that?
Well, it's very, very hard, because one of the main purposes of the modernist project, which is essentially to replace a Bible-based Judeo-Christian view of family and society with you'll pardon me, but with a Marxist socialistic vision of society. And one of the fundamental pieces of that has been to drive women into the workplace. One of the ways we do that is we say to women, hey, you'll find fulfillment at work. How can you spend time with your husband and kids? Aren't you a thinking person? And so huge numbers of women, millions and millions of women, are conned and misled to believe that raising and imparting values to your children and taking care of them and bringing them up, now that's a real waste of time. But typing instructions in an office and having a boss who barks at you, now that is worthwhile and really fulfilling. And so the meaningfulness of my work is enormously enhanced where I'm doing it in order to make it possible for other people in my family to do their thing. And so I remember when I got married, my wife was the CFO of a company, and I remember I said to her, I know this is going to be tough, but I need you to quit work. She was horrified. She was upset. And she eventually saw that this was a deal breaker for me. I'm not willing to share my wife with her boss at work. And number two, I knew that my financial success depended hugely on me not making money just for me, but for somebody else, having somebody else who was a partner in the whole enterprise. Jeremy, I'll tell you a Lapin slogan number 32.
Okay.
Every job in America is a two-man job. Every single job, I shouldn't say man, is a two-person job.
Okay.
And Microsoft and Google and Facebook understood this very early when they started putting on their campuses, restaurants, laundries, all the things that you have to take care of in
like
life.
A house.
Sorry?
It's like they're bringing everything from the house.
Everything, no reason.
Yes.
I said to my wife, you would be doing me the greatest favor and the greatest honor by letting me have the privilege of supporting you. And from now onwards, everything I make isn't my money, it's our money. Because I know I wouldn't be able to do it if you weren't doing your part. I would not be able to concentrate on work if I thought my kids were at a daycare or at a governmental childcare place. No, I want my children to be with my wife, with their mother. You do that for me, and everything will go smoothly. It'll all be okay. And she did.
It seems that one of the things that is required, and one of the things that you're creating, and even so, there seems to be like a very strong family identity. So when you leave that position as a wife and come and serve the family, I think why so many women find this difficult is because their husbands aren't doing that. Their husbands are going off to work in order to build their own personal identity. And then for them to say to their wife, and then why don't you sacrifice your personal identity and come and work or stay at home while but for you, it seems like every moment you go to work, you're thinking, I'm building my family.
That's right. That's back to your essay. I think of the words are ringing in my memory now, because that's exactly right. I don't have a career. I have work.
That's right.
It's not my career. My career is being a husband and a father.
Yes.
Now I have work. That's a part of it. I have to make sure that there is money.
Yeah.
And so I make money and I earn money.
Yes.
But I do that as a father and as a husband.
So I need to ask you, Rabbi Lapin, that that statement you just made, I only learned because I spent time in Israel. Like I was around so many Jewish fathers who talked like that, but I grew up in a Christian environment where that wasn't obvious. And I was, once I saw it within the Tanakh, a lot of times when I would talk to Jewish families, they really saw this because Abraham, as the sort of model father, was a father, first. I mean, and they even talk about him as Father Abraham, and so there's something within in the tradition and the faith of Judaism that really helps men in particular not atomize from their family. What is that?
Yes, it's very important. We also have a model of the opposite, somebody who didn't do it right. His name was Moses. Moses had two sons. You may not know their names because hardly anybody does.
Yeah.
They're mentioned. The oldest one was Gershom,
yeah.
And the young one was Eliezer.
Okay. Forgot him.
And after they're born, you never hear of them again. And that's because Moses was so busy with his mission that he neglected his family. Now, we saw him do it early on. You may remember where an angel nearly killed him because he didn't circumcise his son.
Yeah,
and so from the very beginning, he was more focused on his career than on his family.
Wow. I've not heard that because Moses is such a revered figure.
Yeah, he is. He is. And we got to remember that human beings are not balance sheets. Human beings are not profit and loss statements. On a profit and loss statement, if in the month of August, or say the month of July, I made $100 and I spent $90, well, then my net profit, my net income at the end of the month was $10. That's it. That's all I care about. I'm left with $10. But with human beings, it's not like that. If as a human being during the month of July, I did 10 really lovely things. I did 10 good things, what we call a mitzvah. I did 10 good things. But to be honest, I also did 7 not so good things. I lost my temper with somebody. I was angry unnecessarily. I wasn't 100% truthful with somebody. And when I check my little notebook at the end of the month, I see 7 times I did something wrong, 10 times I did something good. So what's the net result of that? That I'm worth 3? 10
No.
minus 7? No. You don't do that with human beings. You do that with money. With human beings, everything stays just the way it was. I did 10 good things and I did 7 bad things. You just have to live with that. Try and do better next month. And so with Moses, we don't dismiss Moses. We don't say, he was a great leader. He was our ultimate teacher. Yeah. But he was a pretty bad father.
Wow. And then the contrast.
And by the way, there's no pattern in the Hebrew scripture. Not only is there no Hebrew word for hero, but there is no notion that we should try and be like Abraham or try and be like Moses. You know who I'm taught to be like?
Who?
Me. I'm taught to be like I could be if I was everything I was planned to be. If I could only be everything God expected of me, now that's what I'm supposed to aim for. I'm not supposed to be Abraham.
Where do Jewish fathers then get their understanding of fatherhood? So because again, I'm talking to a lot of men who are in a culture where their fathers haven't taught them what fatherhood is, and so they've completely lost connection with any kind of archetype of the father. And when I talk to Jewish families, they seem to retain that at such a deep level.
Yes.
Where is that coming from?
Let's throw into that question a parallel part of it, which I hope you'll like, and that is, why are Jews disproportionately good with money? Okay. You're saying, why are Jewish men disproportionately good as fathers?
Yes.
And we are throwing in, why are Jewish people disproportionately good with money? The proportion of Jews demographically in America is about 1.5%. That's all it is, at most. Yeah. So that means the Forbes 400 list of the 400 richest Americans should have 400 times 1.5%, should have 6 Jews on it.
Right.
Never has fewer than 60. It's usually about a quarter, usually about 100. So it's 10 times overrepresentation. We got to figure this out. There's something serious going on here. The Israelites are better fathers. They build better families and they make more money.
Yes.
Kind of important.
Those are big deals. Yeah.
Now, the fatherhood stuff we lost because slavery destroys fatherhood. And by the way, it makes absolutely no difference whether you are enslaved to the plantation boss in the big house on the hill or whether you're enslaved to the government.
Slavery destroys fatherhood.
Slavery destroys fatherhood because it makes you redundant. And
because there's another father?
Yes. Who feeds your wife and kids if you're a slave?
Yeah.
Either the slave master, it's not you, it's the slave master, or in the case of welfare, it's the government. And so much so that the government gives the woman who's got kids enough money that she doesn't even need a guy in the house.
Yeah. That's not compassionate.
No, that's cruel. And so at the end of Israel's 400 years of slavery in Egypt, what's the very first thing that happens in Exodus? You have to do the Paschal lamb sacrifice, right?
Yes.
And that's got to be done. In Hebrew, we say, Seh lebeit avot. It's got to be a lamb that is barbecued and eaten around a table in a father-led home. You got to go and collect all the dads and bring them home because we're not getting out of Egypt till we get fatherhood back again.
Wow.
And so that's why before anybody sets foot out of Egypt, before Moses does a single thing, first thing is, let's get the families back together and put the father at the head of the table, the dining room table.
Wow.
And until that happens, nobody ain't going nowhere.
God wanted them to be led by the father. that the household had to be clarified, who was in the household, who was the firstborn son, like all of these familial roles, which are meaningless
Yes.
in the time of slavery, become maximally meaningful, or you're going to get killed by this destroying power that's about to come down on Egypt.
And this is where you see family and finance running together, because if the father doesn't play the critical role in financing the family, you got problems. Now, I know I sound like a dinosaur, but even dinosaurs can tell the truth. And one of the painful truths, please tell me if you're familiar with this stat. I mean, this is so well known that it literally only takes 5 minutes on Google to verify what I'm about to tell you. And that is that marriages in which the woman significantly out-earns the husband don't last long.
Mm. Mm. Well, let me, so you're familiar. So in Proverbs 31, the very end of Proverbs, this woman of valor.
Yes.
So you get this picture of this woman who, it seems like what's happening when you're reading that. And I think on Shabbat, this is read over the wives, right? This is a tradition.
On Friday night, the husband recites that as a tribute to his wife. Yes.
Okay. So in that poem,
I should mention, however, that it was originally written by Abraham as a eulogy to his wife. He said it at her funeral.
Really?
Mm.
Is that in the Talmud? I haven't heard that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So in what's interesting, if you get Rabbi Lapis pointing at the his version of the study Bible that has the notes in there. So in this proverb, there's a lot of economic activity that the woman is doing, but it's all within the household. It seems like she's, considering a field and buying it. She's got maidservants, and the household itself, in the Proverbs 31 sense, is a thriving enterprise. I think one of the things that women today are really frustrated with is that we have kind of a 1950s idea of what when you hear somebody talk traditionally about women staying home and men going to work, they picture this thing that happened for about 15 years in human history, where right after World War II, when there was so much prosperity that men went off, women were at home. They didn't have a lot to do because there was all these new inventions that were coming out. It was just a weird time, I think, for the family. But historically, women did lots of economically productive activity, but it was centered in the home, right? Is that the distinction? How would you, how do you?
Well, I'd go just a bit further than that, and okay. I would ask you the following question, Jeremy. Does your family send out Christmas cards every year?
Yes, we do.
May I ask who takes care of that, you or your wife?
My wife does.
Tell me something. Do birthday cards or birthday presents go out to uncles and aunts and cousins and that sort of thing from time to time from your house?
Yes, it does.
Please allow me to ask you this question. I don't mean any disrespect, but who takes care of that, you or your wife?
That'd be my wife.
Yeah. Funnily enough, the same thing is true in my home.
Really? That's such a coincidence.
It's a total coincidence, but there is no word in the Hebrew language for coincidence. And that's a very important thing to remember, because we should distrust coincidences.
Yes.
What women do is keep us connected. And when I do live presentations at churches and at companies, one of the questions I ask is, would every one of you, men, who has benefited financially from a business connection that came into your orbit because your wife knew the other person's wife, or your kids go to school together and your wife is in the same carpool? In other words, how many of you have made money through a contact that came into your orbit because of your wife? Almost everybody acknowledges that. I encourage women to become Amazon FBA sellers, something you can do from home. If you've got little kids that you don't have, they don't take up all your time. I mean, certainly maintaining connections, social connections, maybe your kids, maybe you homeschool like my wife did. But whatever it is, these things, I can't believe that.
That's right.
Sorry about that. Forgive me. There are many, many home things, like you spoke about, the Proverbs 31 woman. Yeah, today it's so great. You can become an Amazon reseller all run from your home. I know a woman lives in Israel. She's got 9 children, and she supports the family. By now, I'm not saying you got to know what you're doing, and there are a lot of other things like that. My point is that we're living in a wonderful time where it actually is possible for a wife to actually even make a financial contribution to the family, but from home. And that's great.
Yes.
Because if little Tommy can knock on the door and say, "Mommy, I need you," that's fantastic. That's the key thing.
Yes, that makes sense. Well, I got one more question I want to ask you. So we talked about the family. One of the things that you've mentioned is that you go away on these business trips. And I also noticed that you're a rabbi. So in the Christian tradition, when I talk to most pastors, people that make their living doing Christian ministry, I don't see a lot of people simultaneously pursuing growing business enterprises. And I've met multiple rabbis. In fact, I rented an apartment in Jerusalem from a rabbi who was a brilliant real estate guy. I learned a lot from him about business just in our conversations, but he was also a rabbi. And so I don't understand this. It's hard for me to understand how these things work together. I wish they did. I talked to many, many pastors, and they all just believe these are totally different. Either you live your life, for ministry, for God fully, or you go into the business world. They live in this world in which these two things are very separated. I see that that's often not the case with Jewish rabbis and leaders. Why is that? What is that kind of behind?
Okay, so I should tell you, part of my ministry is helping pastors and their wives and churches get out of a poverty mindset.
Okay.
And I must tell you, when I pull up at the church parking lot an hour before I'm supposed to start a Rabbi Daniel Lapin seminar, within the first 5 minutes, I know what the financial mindset of that church is. I notice grass growing through the cracks in the parking lot. I see the building needing a bit of roofing repair. I see a light bulb out here and there. And then I see the pastor's wife has stress lines on her face from not getting bills paid. And I know right away what's going on. And then we do a series of 3 seminars. And part of the deal is I come back a year later to evaluate where we're at. And it's a case of understanding that money is holy. Money is part of God's plan for human interaction. Money is part of God's answer to not good for man to be alone. And there is nothing more self-destructive to a person's financial well-being than the deep and implanted belief that somehow money is tainted, bad. No, money means you've served another one of God's children. Having money means nothing more than that. It doesn't mean that every person with money is a nice, good person. It doesn't mean that.
I wonder if some of this happened. So one of the things I sense happens in the church with regards to family and money is that the New Testament was written, I think, with a very, very strong consciousness of the Hebrew scriptures. That all the writers of the New Testament were immersed in the Tanakh. Obviously, guys like Paul and other writers. And so when Paul said things like the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, I think that he was correcting a understandable problem that could occur within these churches, assuming that they were being that they really understood and knew the Hebrew scriptures. And I think
guess so, because I mean, I don't know the New Testament, I'll be honest, but my understanding is that there's far more sex in the Old Testament than in the New Testament.
Yes, there's no multi-generational families in the New Testament because the New Testament was written in one generation. And so
Well,
if you're
there
going to
you
understand
go.
family, you can't.
Right, but you know what happened between Judah and his daughter-in-law, and what happened between Ruth and Boaz in the book of Ruth, and again and again, and also all the laws, in Leviticus 19, Leviticus 20, the rules about who you can sleep with and who you can't sleep with. I mean, this is all very much number two.
Yes.
I also believe that there's considerably more money talk in the Old Testament than the New.
Yes. Yes.
And none of it is bad. All the money talk is, here's the rule. If you lend money to somebody for business purposes, here's how you do it. If you're lending money to somebody who needs money, you mustn't charge interest. If you're taking collateral, then here's how you have to treat the collateral. If you hire a workman, you have to pay him right away at the end of his workday. You can't leave. This is like one.
Yes.
There's actually considerably more laws and regulation and ritual in the Old Testament about money than there even is about kosher food, the dietary laws.
And so this allows people to understand where the lines of justice are when it comes to money, so that you're not constantly walking around with a sense of guilt because you're earning money, right? And which is devastating. You're saying that this is really what causes people problems. It's this mentality.
100%, you got it. Yes, that's exactly right. And on the question of pastors and rabbis, well, the trouble is that in the Jewish community model, most synagogues are operated on a dues structure, not on a free will offering structure.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that, and it's not a good thing, but that's how they evolved in the United States of America. That the end result is that the rabbi is very clearly an employee.
Okay.
Now, a leader can be a lot of things, but he can't be an employee.
Yeah, explain
you can't possibly lead people who can fire you.
Fire you. Yeah, there's a little difference, conflict of interest.
And so there is a very strong tradition. You alluded to the Talmud earlier, but in the oral transmission of Judaism and the fuller explanations of the Old Testament, it's very clear that rabbis of old all had jobs. They all worked because it's impossible not to. So for the years that I planted and led the Pacific Jewish Center, a synagogue in beachside Los Angeles, at the same time, I was also in the real estate business. Not hugely successfully, but I supported my family. And I was even a donor to the congregation. And that way, you couldn't fire me because nobody was paying me.
Yes.
And so many times I had to make rulings that were unpopular. And the only way that people could react to that was by leaving and going to another synagogue, in the same way that buying a watermelon at the grocery doesn't make me a shareholder of the grocery chain. It makes me a customer.
Yes.
And if I don't like the transaction or the watermelon, I can shop elsewhere. So that's why I always, and I'm not alone in this, try to make sure that I earn my living in business. Today, my ministry is rabbidaniellapin.com. It's primarily an online ministry, and I do financial training for companies and for individuals and for churches.
Yes.
So
we need this training, Rabbi. The Christian
it's tremendous. I can't tell you what joy I feel in my heart, Jeremy, when I return a year later in all of these instances.
Yeah.
And I see a different church made up with different people, and the whole atmosphere is buoyant, and they're not fearful, and they've all become givers, not takers.
That's so good.
It's the most beautiful thing.
Well, I want to say, on behalf of the Christian community that I'm a part of, so many of us have read your book, have been influenced by your ministry, and I just want to thank you for talking to me. I thank you for what you're doing. We desperately need this kind of interchange. There is a real lack of understanding about the practical nature of the Hebrew Scriptures within the Christian community, and its impact on family and money, and the things we've been talking about are enormous. And so, thank you, Rabbi Lapin. Any other places that people can go to obviously your book, Thou Shalt Prosper? Are there other things that you would recommend? You have a great podcast I've been really enjoying.
Well, I have a book, a second follow-up book is called Business Secrets from the Bible.
Okay.
And it's based on the idea that every single one of us, unless you work for the post office or you are a Supreme Court justice, every one of us is in business. If you can be fired, and if your pay can be raised or lowered then you're in business. Whether you're an employee or not, you're in business. And there are many, many important business secrets in the Bible, in ancient Jewish wisdom. I also have an online training program at rabbidaniellapin.com called the Financial Prosperity Program, and that's a 10-hour video training. And people have to realize that if you're in financial stress today, it's only because of the mistakes you made yesterday. You got to admit that.
Yeah.
You want to know. You want to know the name of the person who's responsible for your financial stress. Look at your driver's license. You'll see a picture of him. That's who's responsible. Right. And that means it's also in your power to transform and change and start from here to do the things that will increase your revenue. Because increased revenue doesn't make you a bad, evil, greedy person. Increased revenue means you've taken care of more of God's children.
That's good. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi. This has been a really great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Great talking with you. It's lovely to finally actually meet you in digitally, at least if not yet in person, but I look forward to that pleasure in the future.
Have you ever considered starting a family business so you can spend more time working as a family team? We've started a year-long coaching program called Family Inc., where you get weekly coaching with Jeremy, access to our video training for launching family businesses, and lots of ideas for businesses to start that are working for other family teams. Head over to familyteams.com and click Family Inc. to learn more, or to set up a strategy call with Jeremy to see if this might be a good fit for you. Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.